Alright, welcome back to the C-17 build, or sort of run through of the C-17 build. In part 1, I went over the fuselage, landing gear, that sort of thing. Part 2, I'm going to be going over engines, wings, electronics, tail services. So, I will start over here with the massive vertical stabilizer. Now, that is just hot wire cut foam. It's got 10mm carbon rod for strength. That carbon rod will run all the way through the fuselage, and then there's a cutout for that the bottom part of the vertical stab will sit in. So once it's all glued, it'll have a secure mounting point throughout the whole fuselage. Up at the top end of the vertical stab is casted out of 2 layers of 6 ounce per square yard fiberglass cloth. The reason I did that is, well, for strength, because the massive horizontal stab sits on the very top of the vertical stab, and it needs to be strong, because I don't know about you, but I prefer when my tail does not fly off the airplane. So these 2 little protrusions on the side, on the lowest part of those, are reinforced with 1 layer of fiberglass mat. And same where the carbon rod inserts are for the rear portion of the horizontal stab, because these do have to be removable. And that's a 10-12 carbon rod. So 10mm inside diameter, 12mm outside diameter. Goes all the way through and glued into place, epoxied into place. Very strong. Got your little anti-crash beacon up there. It's mounted to the main portion of the vertical stab in the same way I did the wing box and the gear pods for the fuselage. Now the rudder is its own sort of deal. Was just cut out of the hot wire cut vertical stab. I put balsa around the edges for reinforcement. Then balsa leading edge, sanded that to shape, sanded in the receiving portion of it on the vertical stab. And then for the hinge, there's no hinges along the hinge line. All the hinges are on the bottom and the top, and they're actually just carbon rods into wooden blocks. Or rather, the bottom one's the carbon rod, 5mm carbon rod into a basswood block down here. After I drilled the hole for that carbon rod in the basswood block, I put a bunch of thin CA that soaked into the wood to harden it. Then I drilled the hole again so it's perfectly smooth. So that way it won't wear out, and there's a good smooth hinge for the carbon rod. Up here it's a 3mm carbon rod, goes about 3 inches into the top. Same on the bottom, goes about 3 or 4 inches. And then on this side, because this bottom carbon rod is the hinge and the torque rod that moves the whole rudder, I drilled through the balsa, thick balsa leading edge into that carbon rod and embedded even more carbon rod so that it won't rotate in the rudder. Can't see it here now, but there's a 3mm carbon rod, and then I believe it's actually push rod tubing. I think it's like nylon or something. In the bottom end down here is where it hinges, and then the carbon's glued up here, if I remember correctly. As you can see, you've got your servo wires in the top, or the servo connectors. That's the female end, and it's glued into the fiberglass. And I'm on the other end, on the horizontal stabs, I'm gonna glue the other end of the connector into the horizontal stabs. That way, when I slide the stabs on, the electronic connections are done automatically for convenience. Servo mount, just basswood glued and fiberglassed onto the carbon rod and into the foam. Servos accessed from the bottom, screwed on. That is, I believe, just a big servo arm with a pin drilled through it so that doesn't slide on the carbon rod. And then it's a Freewing 17-gram metal gear. And then there'll be a hatch on the bottom of the fuselage so I can access this if it ever fails or I need to replace it. So, got your 2 massive horizontal stabs. They're just hot wire cut foam with balsa on the leading and trailing edges. Same thing for the elevators. Leading edge is balsa, shape sanded in. They're all fiberglass. It's all fiberglass with 2 ounce, 1 ply of 2 ounce glass. This uses Robart pin hinges in there, 3 of them to get that nice tight hinge. Then on the bottom, got your servo mount, Freewing 9-gram metal gear. You're like, oh man, only 9 grams for this big airplane? Yeah, that's all it needs on the horizontal stab. It's not gonna have much throw, so I'll be able to use mechanical advantage to get some extra torque from the servo, and I'm not gonna be flying it hard, so it doesn't actually need anything or that strong of a servo on the elevators. As long as it's a reliable servo, it's good. Also, part of the reason I went small servos, went with a 9-gram instead of a 17-gram, is because the servos sit so far behind the CG that they actually make a difference on where your CG lies. So you have to save weight everywhere you can. Now for mounting the horizontal stabs, making them removable, 5mm carbon rod on the back, 10mm outside diameter, 8mm inside diameter carbon rod on here, so it slides into the top end of the vertical stab. So this slides all the way through, and the vertical stab is about that wide, and then you still have this much of the carbon sticking out on the other side, and that's where on the other horizontal stab it has a receiving rod on the inside that slides over once it's all in place. Then these little 5mm nubs on the end just keep it from rotating. Then the benefit of doing it that way is, one, you use less carbon, but also once it's all slid together, you only need 1 screw going through the carbon in order to hold the stabs on or stop them from sliding off. Wings. Hot wire cut insulation foam. The way I do the hot wire cut is I 3D print the template, root, and tip. And typically that would melt the PLA if you put the hot wire on there and then cut it. But it's a cool trick. You just put a layer of aluminum tape around the edge. It works fine. So I do that. That way the 3D printer, you get super precise templates. So I cut that out. Balsa leading and trailing edges. As always, there's this balsa, I guess you could call it a spar, running all the way through. It's more just to stop compression, so slightly less wing flex for strength. And that only goes about halfway down into the wing. Got a 18 outside, 16 inside, or wait, no. 18 inside, 20mm outside carbon rod for here for the main spar joiner, and an 810 rod for the rear end. That's more than enough to keep it sturdy. Basically for that, I just drilled in, Gorilla glued those in. Right, bottom side of the wing, right here, there's a plywood plate, and then a little receiving spot, so the receiver on the other end of the fuselage slides in there, 2 screws to stop the wing from sliding off, so it's transportable. Wires are all cut into the foam. As you can see, that's what all these white marks are. These are lights, aileron, servo. Then you've got aileron lights, flaps, spoilers. Those run out to here. I'm using these little multiplex connectors, 6-pin, to make disconnections easy at the field. Same thing for the main power, except you've just got your, I believe it's 14 gauge or 12 gauge wire running out to here, using XT90E connectors, XT90E for those main powers. The reason I like the E connectors is because on the wire harness here, they have nice flanges, so you can bolt them right to the fuselage. Makes it easy to disconnect. Power for the reverse and ESCs, or signal for the ESCs on another little multiplex connector. Flap hinges are made out of popsicle sticks. Yes, I'm ridiculous. I'll have a better picture of them. I'll show you how I did it, how I made them strong, how they embed into the flap here. Pretty straightforward. Just got to make sure your distances are the right distance. And then it's just a small screw that goes through each one that it hinges on. The wood is once again soaked in thin CA for just to bind all those grains together so there's no splitting. Wing fairings, flap track fairings here are just balsa wood. Sheet of balsa each side, sheet on the top, sand it to shape, fill it. They still need some refining, but they work good. The real C-17 has double slotted flaps. I wanted to recreate that, but then I was looking at it and I'm like, double slotted flaps, that's gonna be really hard. And then I was looking even closer at pictures of the C-17. They're not actually double slotted flaps. It's basically just a flap with a slat on the front. And I'm like, oh, that's totally doable. So that's all I did. Balsa wood, sanded into an airfoil. Still needs a little adjusting. Basically sanded into that shape of the slat. Made a nice big channel in the wing. It's fiberglass too, so I can keep this little bottom edge stiff. Oh yeah, and by the way, the outside of the wing is covered in a ply of 2-ounce fiberglass. But it was so thin here that I had to put glass on the inside as well, just so it was stiff enough and didn't flap around and break for this on this inside channel. Also, I wanted a little extra reinforcement since this cut was so close to the carbon rod. I needed to get the strength back. But basically, hinges, and it slots beautifully into the wing. Now, to get the spoilers stiff, and they're so thin, what I had to do, I laid a piece of vinyl over here, put some mold release on it, then I actually casted the bottom side of the spoiler fiberglass on the top here, so it took the exact shape of the bottom of this. That way I could make them as thick as possible, but it would sit perfectly to each individual wing custom fit. And then I believe that was actually one ply of 6-ounce glass. Then for the top side of the spoiler, it's a little messy right now, but that's because it's a ply of 2-ounce and it's a ply of that fiberglass mat. And what I did, I just put some vinyl down on the table, put some mold release on it, and then casted it straight on the table to make a big flat piece of glass, and then just cut it to shape here. It's a little overcut here, but I'll trim it later. Basically, before I released this from the bottom portion, I put my little balsa vertical things and hinge blocks in and embedded the hinges. Those are Dubro nylon hinges. I forget what size. They're the small ones. They hinge so smooth. And now this is super tight, super sharp edges. And then after I glued the top sheet on, basically just trimmed it and sanded it to shape perfectly, and then hinged it. And now you've got a spoiler that sits perfectly on top of your wing. So yeah, I think off the top of my head, that's all I can explain now for the wings. So let's move on to the engine nacelles, or rather the power. So actually, one more thing on the wings. Servos, gonna need a flap servo and a spoiler servo. Spoiler servos, 9 grams. Flap servo 17. That's on this little plate. I'll put some blocks around the edges so it can screw on. Goes this way. So one plate does both servos, so you don't have to cut more holes in your wings than you have to. Do the same for the ailerons, just like I did on the elevators, just one little removable plate. All right, power system. 4 70mm EDFs. These are the FMS 1900 kV 12 blade inrunner EDFs. There'll be 4 of them. Well, technically 2 of those. These are actually E-Flight. I want to say 1850 kV. Basically the exact same EDF shroud fan. The spinner's slightly different, but that doesn't matter. But if you didn't know, E-Flight and FMS are basically the same thing. The EDF housings are exactly the same. So they're slightly mismatched kV on the motors. So what I'll do, I'll put just one of each on each wing so that they're balanced. And then I'll make sure the matched EDFs are both on inboard or outboard motors. So those will be running on 6S One battery will run 2 EDFs. I don't have the batteries yet, but I'm going to be running, I believe, 8,000 milliamp 6-cell packs. Speed controls. Hobbywing Skywalker version 2. I never tried the version 2, but I had really, really good luck with the version 1. And I like them because they're super light, super thin, they're cheap, and they work beautifully. Only difference between version 1 and version 2 is these have reverse. So I'll have reverse thrust, which is absolutely necessary on a C-17. It would be sick to have like the sliding nacelle for the reverse thrust, but that's just way too complicated for a plane of this scale. So reversing ESCs, it's perfect. Speaking of nacelles, I only have 2 built right now. These are them. They're each casted out of 1-ply 6-ounce glass from 3D printed molds. Here's the molds for the inboard nacelles. They've been used twice now, that's why they look a little rough. The inboard and outboard nacelles are slightly different. If you look at the C-17, the pylons on the inboard and outboard are not mounted at the same angle. So what I had to do, print 2 different molds. I have not done the outboards yet, but those are the molds. They still need to be prepped. So there's a left and a right for each nacelle, and then you have an engine inlet mold and a thrust tube mold. So you've got left side, right side, inlet, and then the thrust tube for that. Basically, once it was casted, I hand cut the internal structure. It's kind of hard to see. Glued it all together while it was still in the mold so it would hold the right shape. And I cut this front part off so it could be removable. I added this small lip so it would sit flush. This would sit flush on that other end. And then I glued the inlet to the front half of this nacelle here. And basically the reason I did that is so I could make the EDFs removable. The way I usually do that is cutting a hole on the bottom and having the EDF slide out from the bottom, but that's a lot more work and definitely not as pretty. So what I did on this end is I put these 2 little slots. There's 2 little receiving slots on this end that the EDF slides into perfectly. Then on the back side, there's blocks upper and lower, and I'll put a screw with a little plate that'll stop the EDF from sliding forward. Hard to do it one-handed. EDF slots in from the front like so, lines up. Oh wait, it's not in all the way. Okay, so the EDF slides in the front like so, slides into the thrust tube nicely, and then you can slide the front half of the inlet on, if I can line it up the right way, like so. And then EDF is sitting in there nicely. Got a nice smooth inlet to the fan, so it should be nice and efficient. And then I'll just put some blocks on the inside here that this front little edge of the nacelle can screw onto. ESCs will not be in the wings, they'll be in this portion of the nacelle right here. The reason I had to do that is because the C-17 has a super stubby nose, which means there's a lot more weight to the back than to the front, and I would have to add a lot of nose weight. So to try and prevent that, I'm moving as much weight forward as I can, so instead of having an ESC here, it's gonna be here to hopefully move the CG a little further forward. So yeah, I believe these are 6-ounce glass, and then there's a couple areas that are reinforced with the fiberglass mat, like here, here, and here. Internal structure is balsa, and then it's got some carbon running through it as well. Keep it nice and strong. So I gotta make 2 more of those, but once that's done, I can figure out how to mount them to the wings. Apart from that, that's almost it. I mean, here's my wiring harnesses that it's gonna need. These will be on the fuselage side, so I can connect the power for the EDFs and all the flight controls and lights on the wings. They're all quick connectors, so it'll be easy disassembly at the field. That's all I can think of right now. That's sort of where I'm at in the build right now. Wingtips, I'm planning to either build out of balsa or cast out of fiberglass, but that'll come sooner or later. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick little overview of the C-17 project. Been pretty involved. I think I'm 11 months into it right now, but it's been super fun, super challenging, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. So next build videos will probably be a little while because progress is slow right now with school. But apart from that, I mean, you should expect it. I mean, there's not a whole lot I can get in the next build videos unless you want me to go even more detailed and time lapse my build process. So let me know if you want me to do that. I'm happy to. But yeah, there's C-17 front end musketeer. That looks familiar. Got Vegan. A220. Now these builds, I also have millions of pictures of, so I could do like a picture compilation and voice over if you want to see those builds as well, because I've got so many pictures of them. Those are my other projects. My messy workshop, Branson Mobile, rocket powered. That was a stupid little project, but super fun. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this little overview. If you have any questions, let me know. As for now, stay tuned until the next one. Thanks for watching.